So I'd like to take this opportunity now to welcome you all to Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, a night of poetry and German Ohio history with Dr. Suzanne Ondrus. Though you don't know, my name is Rob Ellis, and it's my delight to welcome Suzanne to this session. Dr. Suzanne Ondrus was a 2018 Fulbright Scholar to Burkina Faso, where she taught creative writing, African literature, literary theory, and American studies. Suzanne has a number of qualifications, including an MFA in poetry from Bowling Green State University, an MA in English from Binghamton SUNY, a BA in International Business and Management from Wells College, and a PhD in Comparative Literary and Cultural Studies from the University of Connecticut. And the PhD had a particular focus on African women's epistolary novels and techniques of intimacy. As a poet whose works explore cultural identity and the human dramas that shape and transcend it, her poems delve into love, desire, different cultures, history, racism, and women's sexuality. As you can see, language and cultural immersion really shaped Suzanne's artistic vision, and she's had an opportunity to work in a wide range of countries around the world. In addition to Burkina Faso, where she did her Fulbright Award, she's also worked in Guinea, Russia, Benin, Ghana, Uganda, Italy, and Germany. And again, perhaps appropriately, she is fluent in French, Spanish, Italian, and German. Her first poetry book, Passion Seeds, Love and Longing Between an American and an African, won the 2013 Venice Quevedo Prize. She's also received a number of additional accolades for her work, including Golden Square Review's recent 2022 runner-up winner for prose. She was a winner in prose for nature writing in Geiger Park Systems 2022 competition. She was a 2013 Read Magazine Markham Poetry Prize winner. And in addition to being a Fulbright Scholar to Burkina Faso in 2018, she was also a 2017 featured UNESCO World Book Capital poet in Guinea. You can find her poems in her own collection she's published, but also in Wanderlust, New Square, Read Magazine, The Long River Review, Slab, Frig, Calera, Gender, Route 7, CV2, and Visitant. And that brings us very nicely to today's session. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing some of her poems from her new poetry book, Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, which is forthcoming with Finishing Line Press. Is it out already, Suzanne, or is it coming out in September? I couldn't see from the website.
It's right now in pre-orders, and then if you order, they will mail the copies out September 16th.
Wonderful. So we're going to be hearing some poems from that new collection. This is a collection that examines domestic violence and homicide of an 1881 Ohio-German immigrant couple from Wood County. To hear more of her poetry, you can find her on YouTube, a channel simply called Suzanne Ondrus, and you can also find links to her writing online and further info about her practice at suzanneondrus.com. You're pleased to hear that's my bit over with. It's now my true delight to introduce Suzanne to you so we can hear some of her poetry from her forthcoming collection. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you very much for introducing me, Rob. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. I'm really delighted to have friends from all over, some from international too. So thank you for coming. So this is the story of Mary and Carl Bach. And Carl's murder of Mary in 1881. It's also a story of female resistance, victim blaming, media, gender pressures, community, and our lure to the sensational and gruesome. I first encountered the Bach case at Wood County Museum in Northeast Ohio in 2005 while I was studying for my MFA in poetry at Bowling Green State University and taking a graduate class in German theater there too. Domestic violence and domestic homicide are still major problems today. So according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, November 2021 report, in 2020, approximately 47,000 women and girls were killed worldwide by their intimate partners or other family members. On average, a woman or girl is killed by someone in her own family every 11 minutes. And worldwide, 137 women are killed every day by their boyfriend, spouse, or a family member. This is specifically a very big problem in America, finds the UN. In the last 10 years, there has been an 8% increase in female intimate partner homicides, specifically in the US, while Europe saw a 13% decrease. So I'm going to open with a poem about this case, and it is called a found poem. So I looked at part of the 1883 Wood County Centennial newspaper. They're big newspapers, they're almost double the width of today's newspapers. And this is called an erasure type of poem. It's called Carl Bach. So you erased parts of the poem that don't stand out, and Carl Bach, his history and crime retold, a sorrowful chapter account of the trial and execution. On the morning of the 11th day of October, 1881, came into Bowling Green, parcel in his hand, staring about in a bewildered sort of way, as if he might be a stranger or was looking for someone. Addressed himself to Sheriff T.C. Reed in rather broken English. I want to go to jail. Mr. Reed looked at him closely. His eyes, bloodshot and red, shone with an unnatural light and betrayed great emotion and a desperate state of mind. His whole appearance denoted painful agitation. Have you been having more trouble with the old woman? Yes, bad trouble, said he. Have you been whipping her again? Said the sheriff. Yes, I whipped her dead. Great God, no. Killed your wife? Yes. I want to go to jail. Staring, crying. How did you kill her? Asked Mr. Reed. With the corn cutter. Where is she? In the house. Now, is it likely she is not hurt bad as you think? Here again he sobbed. Incoherently said, she is dead, Sheriff. Put me in jail. He carried some old deeds and papers, examining articles from him, locked him in jail, a perplexed state of mind. The man was Carl Bach, a German, 57 years of age, resident of this country about 22 years. So Mary and Carl Bach were German immigrants who met and married in Cleveland, Ohio. And then after 3 years, they moved to Milton Center in Wood County, Ohio. This area is nowadays about a 2.5-hour car ride east of Cleveland. It's near Bowling Green. And at the time, Milton Center had about 5 to 6 sawmills that took 3 car loads a day, and it had a first-class flour mill. I'm going to present to you Carl and Mary first. So this is a photo of Carl. Carl had been under age 25 when he came to the US, and he'd been in the US about 32 years at the time of the murder. Carl was 14 years older than Mary. He was born in 1823 and came to the US around 1849 to 1848, 12 years before the Civil War. He was born in Minnerstadt or Munnerstadt on the Rhine in Bavaria. His father was a baker and a restaurant owner. He learned tanning and was in the German army in Germany. He was called Old Charlie. The 1883 Wood County Sentinel article called him, quote, good-natured sort of Dutchman, and nobody considered him a quarrelsome or dangerous man, though at times he was moody and despondent, end quote. Note the term Dutchman. This was how Germans were referred to at the time. There was even the expression, quote, to get your Dutch up, that is to say, to become angry. And, and now this is Mary Bach. Mary Bach, Mary Elizabeth Meyer Bach, was born in 1844 in Germany. She had come over from Germany to Ohio with her family. She had 5 brothers and sisters. They had lived not too far from Cleveland in Northeast Ohio. She had first married a German man who went into the Union Army, but he was supposedly dead. We can assume she received a widow's pension. She had no children from this first marriage. Carl and Mary married in 1866, and then 3 years after being married, they together bought 80 acres of farmland in Milton Center and moved to Wood County. So Mary had also bought with her money a good amount of the property. Her neighbors said that she was pleasant. I'm going to read you a poem considering Mary's move to Wood County. It's called Mary's Way. He courted 3 weeks, then asked for my hand. He got them both, and my savings too. Bought us land west of Cleveland in Wood County. Gone was my waiting, gone was my wonder. Ahead was my plot, my chance to get enough for peace. I staved off for riches, said no to an orange silk bonnet, no to crimson and gold ribbons from Paris, no to sugar and cream in my tea, no to butter, no to beeswax candles, no to glycerin soap, and no to weekly letters home. I pushed the unneeded aside and threw myself forward through light short days, through watering 80 acres, through hoeing in the sun, through neighbors' stares, through unattended verse, through weeks of eating only potatoes. So to have a solid Hof and a Suhausa for generations. So in total, Mary and Carl had 3 children, Carl, Marie, and Catherine. At the time of the murder, Mary was 7 months pregnant with their 4th child. I think that Mary Bach is a remarkable woman for her era because of her resistance. She filed what nowadays we call a restraining order, then it was called a peace warrant, and she filed for divorce. Also, she stood up to her husband, refusing to sell the house and land that she also paid for and owned. She feared that Carl would take away the property, the money, and abandon the family, moving out west. Contemporary feminist writer Mona Ethaway, in The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, explains that it is exactly being one's authentic self, being real, that most challenges the patriarchy, owning one's voice and life and publicly speaking about it. Mary Bach for sure challenged the patriarchy, and this plays in my imagination, as well as their German background and their community. This case has been famous for its gruesome details and its relics, such as Mary Bach's fingers that are displayed in the museum. They have been preserved in whiskey for over 100 years, and they were first taken by the coroner from the crime scene as evidence and later kept in sheriff's private cabinet of curiosities. Then Mary's fingers were on display for 92 years in Bowling Green's courthouse, and then for 39 years in Wood County Museum from 1976 to 2015, along with Carl's Bible, pipe, his noose, head covering, and the knife he killed Mary with. And I'll quickly show you those. These are the artifacts too that presently you can see on display. A quick look at the written media reveals obsession with an angle of the gruesome and sensational. So the book Weird Ohio's title for this case is 3 Fingers of Formaldehyde for Mary Bach. And in that description, which is also available online, it's sensational and hyped up. Quote, he decided to take a corn knife to her, dismember her body, and put the prime cuts into his barn. Also, town officials decided they would string old Carl up in front of the Wood County courthouse. And this Weird Ohio is even disparaging towards Mary Bach. Quote, if you'd like to see these gruesome reminders of what might happen if you didn't complete your housework, they are on display in the Wood County Historical Museum. So how is this reported today? The BG Independent News article, Mary Bach's Fingers Are Back with a More Complete Story for Tragic Death, says, quote, the family moved to a farm near Milton Center in 1869. Carl Bach had a couple bad years with crops and went into debt. I think it's interesting to note it's reported that this was solely a burden on Carl. Today, we would view it as on both couples. Quote, in October, as the weather got colder, Carl reportedly told his wife that he wanted to move back into the house instead of sleeping in the barn, and Mary turned him down. That phrase, turned him down, has a sexual connotation. So in 2015, Mary's Fingers, along with the Bach exhibit, were removed and given to David Dyer, a curator of natural history at the Ohio History Connection. He rehydrated the fingers with ethyl alcohol solution. And Wood County Museum curator Holly Kirkendall notes the crime object stayed off exhibit for 5 years so that she and the museum could rethink how to properly present the story, as well as give the public time to forget the old story and ready itself for a new version. The exhibit reopened in 2020, and it has a new story. So now the museum exhibit, it used to be titled The Masked Man Hanged in Wood County. And of 2020, it's now the Mary and Carl Bach story. Historically, the focus has been on sensationalism, not on the horror that happened to Mary. And a committee at the museum came together to examine documents relating to the Bachs and decided how to retell the story. The exhibit in the past was framed solely on the sensational newspaper articles. So in considering how to retell the story, they took 5 years to really think about this, and the exhibit's narrative focus shifts from Carl to the relationship. An outside domestic violence resource connection is brought in to the Cocoon, which is a local sexual and domestic violence shelter in Wood County. And there's a corner of the area where this exhibit is devoted to resources from the Cocoon. Thought about how to create distance between the objects and viewers so viewers might see and understand the whole picture was given instead of objectifying Mary. And they used a timeline strategy to tell the story. Also, they used primary testimony, court testimonies, property records, and life documents. So now you're very curious about the story. First, I'll give you the backstory leading up to the murder. Early on in their marriage, while in Cleveland, Carl beat up Mary, and Mary had wanted to divorce him, but her brother dissuaded her. The family was having financial problems. Money had been borrowed twice to meet back payments on the land. Carl wanted to sell the house and move out west, but he couldn't sell the house without Mary's signature because she co-owned it, and Ohio is a dowager state. Carl frequently beat up his wife to try to coerce her into selling. In July 25th, 1881, he hit her and, quote, she had him arrested for assault and caused him to be put in jail on a peace warrant, end quote. Carl's neighbors paid his bond, and Carl had been told by the judge to seek accommodation elsewhere. We don't know the circumstances, but he was living since August 11th, 1881 in the barn on the property. The day of the murder, October 10th, 1881, Mary and Carl had been to talk with a divorce lawyer, and the talk didn't go well. Carl stayed out late going to Milton Center till about 8 or 9 drinking. He was noted as saying he was going to kill his wife. Apparently, this was not unusual. Carl had been saying it for years, as well as bragging how he beat his wife. When Carl returned home, he proceeded to move things with his 13-year-old son from the adjoining room to the house. And Mary had been in bed. They started to fight. He went into the barn to get the corn knife and proceeded to slay her in front of the children. Carl Bach killed his wife with a 14-inch long corn knife. The scene of the crime was horrific, with blood on the walls and Carl's bloody clothes hid in a shock of corn. Mary's, quote, back part of the head hacked to a jelly, end quote, arm cut nearly off and cut from the mouth all the way back. He struck her above her shoulder. He did not cut her belly. Even the 13-year-old child's clothes had blood on them. He then put the children to bed that night, and early in the morning, he took the children to a neighbor about a mile away, said what he did, and that he was going to turn himself in. He was convicted. He appealed. He was again convicted and was hanged October 12, 1883. He maintained that his murder was not premeditated. He tried to elicit sympathy for himself in a variety of ways. He said his wife angered him and he wanted to whip her. It was as if he was trying to put forth the fact that he was angered justified his actions. Further skewed thinking is seen in how Carl maintained that, quote, the witnesses against me at the trial, they swear to lies, but I forgive them, end quote. Lastly, he tried an out-and-out media tactic. Bach called for the paper's editor and wrote a letter that was published in the paper, eliciting sympathy, drawing on his children, stating how his wife had kept him from his children and how he was sad about that. He describes in detail how he used to hold the baby, how she wouldn't go to sleep until he held her, and how, quote, melancholy and desperate he was when Mary told him he had nothing more to do with household affairs. Quote, I then saw that I was deserted, cast out, without a home, without a child, and that my wife was bound to drive me into the wide, wide world in my old days. What a cheerless prospect did this present for me, an old man, end quote. Carl's tactics did not work. Public hangings were a publicly sanctioned form of entertainment, and Carl Bach's hanging was no exception. It drew 10,000 people and it was held the day after the county fair, and tickets were sold to see him hang. So we will turn to a first selection of poems that show these pressing circumstances relating to the domestic violence in this case. And again, I'm stretching inspired by some of the facts and imagining here. So domestic violence is fueled by outside pressures as well as internal ones: mental health, financial, relationship issues, social pressures, gender roles. Pregnancy is also a very dangerous time for abuse. In fact, homicide is a leading cause of death during pregnancy and the postpartum period in the US. The Bachs had financial and relationship pressures. Perhaps Carl had mental health issues and or substance abuse problems. I imagine there was also homesickness for Germany. The poems that follow are a selection that deals with these pressures. This first one is set up as a balance sheet. So I was playing around with different forms and thinking of, your plus and your minuses. And through the perspective of Carl, who we think of as money giving stature to men. And this poem is titled, They've All Passed Me By. I'm a failed farmer, small, so small. George is a big man with 5 oil wells, who people greet with joy and shout like seeing rain after a long drought. Everywhere bears his mark: the flagpole, the church's fine copper steeple, the red brick school, little Lizzie's doctor bill, and our town's telegraph line. Ezekiel builds the roofs everyone wants. He's never not in demand. There's always a steady income in his hand. And Samuel, who let mud from the flood be credit, now greenbacks and smiles flow in and in. Oh, is he piled high? I am small, so small. My fields barely yield for us to eat till March. I've nothing in my hand because I bought this damn bog land. And so the best I can do is a cabin of logs cut and notched by myself. When Herr Mueller comes by, I shut my shame tight, take a deep breath, puff up my chest, and say 9. This next poem is about the pressure Carl gave to Mary about selling the house and the atmosphere of moving out west at this time. It's called Let's Sell the House, Meine Liebe, which is my love. It's in the paper again. Montana, Texas, letters from out west to us back home in Wood County. Letters to brag to those of us tall and wide that they there too have gotten girth. I can smell the air, enticing seeds to burst. I can see the big sky screaming opportunity and big yields. I can feel the money pushing up all around me like a field of wheat ready to harvest. If we just sell, we can be free. We can pay the debt. We can buy much more land. We can hire hands, and we can reap cash. It's in the paper again. The stories of freedom. Kommt, let's make a go. Lassen wir los von dieses Haus. We must unload this house and push out west, far, far from here. I want to invest in the future and become as wide as all Georgia's 5 oil wells so I can stand proud. This next poem is called Where's Carl? It was sort of inspired by thinking of Where's Waldo? Where's Carl? He's in jail. She wouldn't sign the deed, so he struck her sound. And then the law came in, and he went to jail, and he's staying there because he won't pay bail. So now his crops are going to fail. He'll be fit to be tied when he sees that field. Judge Cook advises Carl. Now I'm seeing a neighbor's quarters as best for you, away from all this trouble. You can go home to tend your crops and livestock, but I see no need to go into the house or to speak with your wife, just the crops and the livestock. And I suggest you peacefully separate, to each his own in good due time. The foreman. Focused on his task is how I describe him. He knew he needed to get something done, and he did it. Through and through, he hammered and tore over and over till the whole roof was done in one day. Tenacious. A tenacious man is what I'd say. He set his mind to finish, and he did. The next selection of poems is a turn towards thinking about the negative criticism that could have existed in the community. And this is titled Driven by Their Stomachs. Driven by the stomach. They say fressen in German for when an animal eats. That's the word I'd use for them, fressers. Devoured their plates in 2 minutes. Then they stared at what was left on ours. Fressers, fast and furious. Eating was serious, had to shovel it in. I heard at their home they had potatoes twice in one meal. Gotta make you full. Can imagine their smiles after a meal of potato dreams. This next poem takes the form of a recipe, and it puts in the domestic violence, the abuse that Mary suffered, juxtaposed with missing food and how food could be a balm for injuries and suffering. And it also brings in a nod towards differences of friends in Germany versus in America. So the seriousness of German friends and superficialness of American friends is here. It's titled Rezept für Heimweh und Unterstützung. So a recipe for homesickness and support. At the onset, when the first faint peaks appear, gather a slice of dark bread. Savor it on your tongue. If none can be had, take a teaspoon of molasses and slowly suck. Next, as the heart of the home, the hearth, becomes cool, take a 1/4 teaspoon ab und zu. Then, when bruised face, neck, back, and hands rise to double in size, Think back to your town's pub with its clinking ceramic beer steins. Let the flavors come together. Next, conjure up your neighbor's reaction there. How the pitchforks would parade down the street, calling for dainman, and let that simmer for several hours. Now, if the women folk around you just cast their eyes to the side, to the ground, comment on the weather, on each other's dresses, bonnets, or gloves, you need to then gather that stifled scream and quarter it from the top to the bottom in your own space. Melt over those strips how the women back home want to look and listen to what's inside. Crisp and crumble on top what they certainly would have asked. How and where and when? In what ways have things changed? Decorate with the pièce de résistance the question they'd have asked. What planning have you done? Now we turn to hear Mary Bach. And this is a poem imagining her writing to her sister and telling her about the situation. Dear sister mine, spoke with the judge while Carl was in jail. I had to sound him out to know what would hold. He said, when two are wanting different ways, it's best to make two ways. And he could do that for us in Wood County. I just want my piece of land, my home. The judge was the only one who looked right at me and opened a way for me. I finally felt solid ground and fresh air, felt I could muster the strength for the fourth child I'd never foreseen. At last there'll be peace. Hope you can come after this one's born. I think you'll like the plains, and maybe we'll stay. I was really struck by how this 1883 newspaper article from the Wood County Sentinel victim blamed Mary Bach. And there were three words that I'll quickly share a screen with you. I had to look up. I had no idea what they meant. They're archaic words. And they are all derogatory words for women. Termagant, an overbearing, harsh-tempered or nagging woman. Virago, a loud, domineering, violent, overbearing woman, a female warrior. Slatternly, of a woman or her appearance dirty and untidy. All three of these words were used in Charles Evers' 1883 article that had been, when I was at the museum in 2005, featured there. And she was painted in a very unfavorable light, and the journalist Charles Evers had not even known the family, and yet he portrayed her this way. So this really struck me, and I made a very short poem based on this. It's called The Power of the Pen. Mary was three words: termagant, virago, and slatternly. The 10-inch long corn knife delivered her to the tar of words slated for women. And those words turned Mary into pure pulp. Sorry, my cursor's. And the next poem is a form in a wanted ad. So I was really experimenting with different forms. I was challenged in a workshop about trying to put these poems and the material in different containers. And so this is coming from the voice of the sheriff and also set up with that format as a wanted ad. It's called Notice. Reward. Of 5 oil wells and continual mouths on your dick, it brought in silent and limp like green onions 5 days old. For the apprehension of one Mary Elizabeth Bach, alias Thunder Wolverine, woman of sizable stature, wide shoulders capable of hauling 2 water-filled buckets each, unkempt, fingernails filled with dirt, stern blue eyes. Beware, has honey locust mouth that looks and smells sweet, but can shred with its thick thorns. She is considered capable of withering all your acres of corn with one sole stare. If you see her, go straight to Sheriff Reed. Wanted for pickling her husband's manhood for all of Milton's Center to see, read, and hear. July 22nd, 1881. And this is the poem now here following is about the murder. It's called Silence. Her throat he grabbed, then lit for the barn, returned that with the stick. There the apple tree stood. You are going to go, not me. There, little Mary with her blanket over her eyes wet herself. He shoved his wife like he shoved a slow cow inside the barn. Her cheek never on a pillow more than 5 hours. He sliced clear to her ear that had caught the baby's phlegm coughs. He flayed her strong voice that called dinner 5 times to the farthest field to a whimper. He gorged her clucks. Not enough money to go to the fair this year, not enough money for a trip to Cleveland, not enough money to buy a wagon, and flung them on the bedroom wall. There, Katie backed against the hearth. Along with a tuft of snarled hair, slovenly, he thrust through and through, trenched out the roses she never knew. The termagant and virago varnished the walls, mirror, floor, and door with her blood. Air flooded in, filled his lungs, her lungs. Quiet, little Carl wore his mother's blood, her blood that gave 4 lives. A willow split by lightning. The door didn't protect her. The peace warrant didn't protect her. Her own son didn't protect her. The 50 ears static in Milton's Center that had heard Carl's crisp death threats didn't protect her. The smoldering strikes stillness, silence, and we remember just a moment before it scavenged the ground. Her plot no longer marked. Mary remains somewhere in this cemetery, but her grave marker is not. Silent, invisible. Today, no one can go back to where Mary lies and stand over her remains. And who would care to search archives, count graves, rub headstones for lost etched names to try to find her? For what beauty is there in the beaten? In the one who lost. And there, the women cleaned Mary up after the crime, but she was buried quietly, but there is no marker. And, you know, that played around with me thinking how there's not a written record of where she is. And this is the last poem that is about the fingers. It's called Evidence. The fingers are withered, yellowed, so that it's hard to tell where the nails are and where the knuckles are. For over 100 years, these fingers have lived at the county courthouse on public display. They have worked beyond their years, beyond their marrow. From the case, they holler at weeping women who fear for their lives. To run, take their lives and run, because that is all that matters, not papers, deeds, money, valuables. Take your life and run. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer for a little bit. So